So this time, I'm actually dueling with a purpose, if you will, with a point, with a clear objective, a clear mindset of what I want to do. And what I want to do today, guys, I don't know if you can tell by the deck or the title. Today, guys, we are going to be attempting to bring out the one and only Exodia. Something that's not easy in this game. For those who don't know, Exodia is basically, it's a dual monster which actually consists of 5 cards, which is its left arm, its left leg, right arm, right leg, and its head. And as you can read by the description here, in fact I'm just going to put it up here, if you have right leg of the Forbidden One, left leg of the Forbidden One, right arm of the Forbidden One, left arm of the Forbidden One, in addition to this card in your hand, you win the duel. Okay, so you get all 5 pieces of Exodia in your hand, you win. That's it. So this deck, right here, is essentially built around that fact. It has cards to help you draw. It has cards to stop your opponent from attacking you. But it also has other little interesting twists, which I don't think a lot of other Exodia decks that I've seen have. So I'm just going to give you guys a little walkthrough of the cards we've got in this deck, and the reason we've put them in the deck. Because, I was thinking about just jumping straight into it, just straight into a duel, but to be honest, I really wanted to share with you guys why I have what I have in this deck. Because I think it's important that I know, and that you know, what it is I'm planning on doing and why I have certain cards, because not all of these cards may necessarily make a great deal of sense, but in my mind they do, and there is a reason for them. So we're just going to go through them one by one, shouldn't take too long, and then we're going to jump in straight to some duels. So, what we're going to quickly do actually is, if we can, how do we sort it? Right, let's sort it by, yeah, you know what, let's just stick with card frames. So, to start off with, we've got our spell cards. First card we've got is Card Trader. Once per turn during your standby phase, you can shuffle 1 card from your hand into the deck and then draw 1 card. So naturally, if you're trying to get certain cards in your hand, this is very useful. For if your draw phase, you draw a card and you don't want it, you can actually send any card in your hand back into the deck and draw again. It's essentially a redraw, which is, in my opinion, very useful to have. It's a continuous spell card, stays on the field as long as no one destroys it, which is very handy. Next we have Clock Tower Prison, field spell card, which I know for a fact is a bit of an unusual one when it comes to an Exodia deck. Essentially, the main reason I have this card is for damage. What often happens with Exodia decks is that it becomes a race. It becomes a race between yourself trying to get the pieces and your opponent trying to take out all your life points quickly before you can get these pieces. So instead, to combat that, if you will, I have this field spell card, which once per turn it places a counter on it. When there's 4 or more counters, I take no battle damage at all. So even if I had no other cards on the field, I don't take damage because of this field spell card, which in my opinion makes it really handy, and I think it will prove to be really useful. We now have, this is interesting, Contract with Exodia. You can only activate this card when you have Exodia the Forbidden One, right arm the Forbidden One, left arm the Forbidden One, essentially all the pieces of Exodia in your graveyard. And with this, you can special summon 1 Exodia Necros from your hand. We're going to get into why I have this card in a bit when we get to the actual monster itself. Next up, Dark Hole. Essentially what this is for is clearing the field, because this deck is not designed as much to have a great deal of monsters on the field. It's more to stop their monsters, my opponent's monsters, from dealing me damage, hence why the Dark Hole is there, to clear the field. Dark World Shackles. The equipped monster cannot attack, also its attack and defense become 100. During each of your standby phases, inflict 500 damage to the controller of the equipped monster. Pretty self-explanatory, really. It's a nice bit of chip damage to the opponent, but on top of that, it's a great way of nullifying a powerful monster that they may have, making them more or less completely useless. Which, once again, as I say, one of the main things about this deck is stopping your opponent from attacking. Now here we have not 1 but 2 magical mallets, which shuffle any number of cards from my hand into the deck, then I get to draw the same number of cards. Essentially, it's a bit like Cards Trader in the sense that it's like a redraw. If I have cards in my hand that I really don't want and I'd rather replace them with something I think is better in the deck, then I can do just that with these magical mallets. Next up we have Messenger of Peace. Monsters with 1500 or more attack cannot declare an attack. During each of your standby phases, pay 100 life points or destroy this card. So essentially, it's there to stop me getting attacked. As I said, this deck itself is not so much designed to deal damage. It can, and I'll get to how in a second, but generally speaking, it's more from stopping my opponent from dealing damage to me. Hence why Messenger of Peace is there. Next we have One Day of Peace. Each player draws one card and neither player takes damage until the end of the opponent's next turn. So essentially this is a very handy card because not only does it allow me to draw an extra card, yes it lets them draw an extra card, but obviously for me, in the grand scale of things, it's more of a benefit. And the fact that it also prevents either of us taking damage. Now as I said, I'm not trying to deal as much damage with this deck as I am trying to preserve myself, which is why it's such a useful card. Next we have Pot of Duality. Now, this is one of the only pots which is actually legal. Pot of Greed, which is arguably anyone who doesn't follow the game competitively may not know. Pot of Greed, which is essentially just draw two cards, is actually banned in competitive play. Rightly so. I mean, it is a bit broken to just get two cards free of charge. So what a lot of players tend to use instead is Pot of Duality, which is essentially, as it says there, excavate the top three cards of your deck, and you get to pick one of them and add it to your hand. The others go back to your deck. So it's essentially you get to pick a card in the top three at the top of your deck, but you don't get all those cards. You only get one, which is why it is legal, it is allowed. Next we have Raigeki. As you can see at the top there, it is a limited card. Destroy all monsters your opponent controls. It's a fantastic magic card, and there's, as I said, it's very rightly so, is limited. That you can only have one at a time because it just completely clears your opponent's field. And it's once again brilliant because for this deck where I'm trying to preserve myself long enough to get Exodia, it's just what I need. Next we have Shard of Greed. This essentially is something else that other people have been using instead of Pot of Greed. Each time you draw a card for your normal draw phase, in your draw phase, place one greed counter on this card. You can send this card with two or more greed counters to the graveyard, and then draw two cards. So essentially it's more of a prolonged Pot of Greed. You can get those two cards, you just have to wait a bit longer to get it, which is why I have two of them, because essentially that's four free cards if I'm allowed to keep it for long enough. Smashing Ground, once again, takes out a powerful monster on the opponent's field. It's kind of a theme the deck has. It's keeping me alive while whittling down their cards themselves, mostly their monsters. You can see here we've got two Swords of Revealing Light as well, which essentially stops your opponents attacking for 3 turns, which, when you're trying to get Exodia, can really be the difference between winning and losing. It really can. I know myself from battling an Exodia deck multiple times that when they put a Swords of Revealing Light up and you know they're going for Exodia, that really gets a sense of urgency in your head. You're thinking, oh god, that's 3 turns that they could potentially draw the pieces that they need, and you really don't want that. So next we have Upstart Goblin. Bit of draw help here, bit of draw support. Draw 1 card, then your opponent gains 1000 life points. As I said, we're not looking to deal damage, so those extra life points to them don't make a great deal of difference to me. So we have Bottomless Trap Hole. Now, thing is, because I also have, as you can see, Trap Hole underneath. Bottomless Trap Hole I like because it doesn't just destroy the monster, it banishes it, it removes it from play. And a lot of decks nowadays involve using cards in the graveyard. So if it's a powerful monster and it's removed from play, they can't do that. And that really screws with people, which is why I really like the card. Defense Draw. It's a bit of a new addition to the deck, this one. Activate only during damage calculation during your opponent's turn. The battle damage you would receive becomes 0. Draw 1 card. That's brilliant. It's very similar to One Day of Peace, in the sense that it essentially stops me from taking damage, and I get a draw card, which is brilliant, which is why I've got 2 of them. Draining Shield. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, target the attacking monster, negate that attack, and if you do, gain life points equal to that target's attack. It's there to preserve my life points as well as stop their monsters from attacking me. Very useful card. Gravity Bind. Level 4 or higher monsters cannot attack. I love this trap card. I use this trap card in a lot of irritating decks like this because it essentially stops powerful monsters from attacking. Obviously, with the introduction of XYZ monsters, or XZ monsters, however you want to say it, it does have a bit of a flaw in that sense because technically XYZ monsters are ranked instead of leveled, but it's still very useful to use. That's why, once again, I've got 2 of them. Jar of Greed, simple card, trap card, draw 1 card, as it says there. Help draw, that's what the card does. That's why I got 2 of them. Just simple draw help, and it's very useful. Magic Cylinder. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, target the attacking monster, negate the attack. If you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to its attack. Now, this is interesting because obviously, as I said, this deck isn't per se used for dealing damage, but if I can deal a bit of damage, that's not a bad thing. And this also negates the attack, which is why it's very useful. Oh, my mistake. What the? I don't really... Okay, there we go. Right, that was weird. Next up we have Metal Reflect Slime. This card is essentially to create a wall between you and your opponent. It creates a monster which has 0 attack and 3,000 defense points, which is kind of broken if you think about it. But it's such a useful trap card because it's not easy. Well, it's easier nowadays, but it didn't used to be easy, at least, to get a monster with 3,000 attack points or over just out there. So this card will essentially, especially early game, just wall their monsters, which once again allows me to draw, which is very useful. Next we have Michizure. Activate only when a monster is sent from the field to your graveyard. Select and destroy 1 monster on the field. You can activate this during the damage step. Now the reason this is quite an interesting one is because it destroys one of their cards for a start, but also I have a few cards in this deck which go to the graveyard from the field on their own accord by activating their own effect. So by doing that, I can essentially use that effect and then just get rid of a monster. And that is just really, really helpful, really handy. Next up, we have a classic. We have Mirror Force. Opponent declares an attack. Destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls. Once again, it's a card to clear the field. That's what it's there for. It's as simple as that, really. It destroys all their attacked monsters. I mean, it protects me very well. And it preserves me. Nightmare Wheel. This is a bit like... what's it called? Here they are. Dark World Shackles. In the sense that it essentially stops a monster from attacking or changing its battle position, and it inflicts 500 damage to the opponent each turn, which is very useful. But I think one of the reasons it's helpful as well is because a lot of people, when they see this kind of card, they tend to focus on it a bit and will often forget, oh wait, they are actually trying to draw Exodia because this is dealing damage to them each turn, and they're like, okay, no, I've got to get rid of that. Next I have the Golden Apples trap card. You know, it's funny, I think this is such a brilliant trap card, and I have to say, I don't think I ever see anyone use it. When you take battle damage while you control no monsters, gain life points equal to the battle damage you took, and if you do, special summon 1 Malice token, Fiend type, Dark, blah blah blah. Its attack and defense are equal to the amount of life points you gained by this effect. So essentially, what you can do with this card is just create a monster which is equal in strength to their strongest monster. That's amazing. That just instantly creates a wall. Instantly. On top of that, you essentially take no damage, because yes, you take the damage, but then you recover it, so it balances out. I mean, self-explanatory. Trap hole. It's a trap. It's a hole. When your opponent normal or flip summons a monster with 1,000 or more attack, it's destroyed. Simple as that. Instantly gets rid of a monster. I mean, here we've got the 4 pieces of Exodia. I don't really need to explain to you what they do. You have them in your hand. That's what you want them for. Absorbing Jar. Destroy all set spell and trap cards on the field, then each player draws one card for each of the cards they control that was destroyed by this effect. You cannot set any cards this turn. So essentially this is useful for numerous reasons. One, it destroys all their set trap and spell cards. If they've got quite a few, I can just instantly get rid of them with this card, which can be very useful. It can also be used to get rid of spell and trap cards that I have, which I don't think I'm going to be using anytime soon, and are just taking up space on the field. That in itself is very handy, because then it also allows me to draw more cards, which for this deck is kind of necessary. Okay, so here we've got a few of these. We've got Arcana Force Zero the Fool. We have 2 Marshmallows. And essentially, what these cards are, they're essentially cards that can't be destroyed in battle. Once again, in my opinion, very underused types of cards. You know, yes, they can be destroyed by effects, but if they can't be destroyed in battle, that instantly, that's a crazy wall for all monsters. And it's amazing. I love these cards. We've also got Blast Sphere. If this face-down defense position card was attacked by an opponent's monster before damage calculation, equip this to the attacking monster. Then, during your opponent's next standby phase, destroy the monster this card is equipped to, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the destroyed monster's attack on the field. So, if you're noticing, guys, in this deck, one trend I do tend to have is destroying monsters and also rebounding damage, dealing damage to them indirectly, because every little bit of damage helps. Now, as I said, the deck is not designed to deplete their life points. It's more about getting Exodia. But the problem with Exodia obviously being, if you lose the pieces, if you don't have all the pieces in your hand, or some go to the graveyard, or you just can't draw them, you need to find another way to win. And that's what these cards are for. Alright, so now we have Blue Dragon Summoner. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add 1 Dragon Warrior or Spell-type monster from your deck to your hand. Essentially, what this card is for, and the reason I have 3, is I can just instantly add one of the pieces of Exodia to the top, to my hand. Instantly. And that's amazing. You know, I mean, I think the one issue I have with this, and it's a similar issue I have with Pot of Duality, is that if you do pick a card of Exodia, if you do pick a piece of Exodia, it does show the card to your opponent. So if it's a piece of Exodia, they instantly know what you're trying to do. And they're like, oh shit, okay, I need to stop them from drawing Exodia. But hopefully by that time, it'll be too late. We also have Card D. Cannot be special summoned. During your main phase 1, if this card was normal summoned this turn, you can tribute it and draw 2 cards and it becomes your end phase. So essentially what this card is good for is if you've already got a sturdy defense, so let's say I've got Sword of Revealing Light up, I've got a couple of monsters that can't be destroyed in battle, I can just summon this card, send it to the graveyard, draw a couple of cards and end my turn. Just to, you know, quickly try and bring Exodia to my hand. Deep Diver, at the end of this battle phase, if this card was destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, choose 1 monster from your deck and place it on the top of your deck. In other words, similar to Blue Dragon Summoner, I can just add this essentially to my hand. The reason I've only got 1 copy is because it does put it at the top of your deck as opposed to putting it in your hand, and I much rather have it in my hand. Des Lacuda. Once per turn, you can change this card to face-down defense position. When this card is flip summoned, draw 1 card. So essentially what this is when I have 2 of these on the field, I can just keep flip summoning them, send them back into face-down position, and get 2 cards. It's just a very quick way to get it, and it's brilliant. So the one card I'm going to show you, actually, before I show you these ones, is Gauls, the Emissary of Darkness. The reason I have this simply put is a lifeline. If I have nothing on the field, you know, the tool hasn't been going my way, and they're attacking my life points directly, this essentially can change a duel. I've seen it turn a duel around. I've experienced it turn a duel around. It's done it for me. It's done it for my opponents. It's a very, very good card. Hence the reason I've got it in my deck, just to have that extra lifeline. And now, guys, what I've got is a bit of an interesting one, because whilst this deck is based around getting Exodia into my hand, Exodia is not the only way I have to win, because I have 2 other cards. I have Exodia Necros. This card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card cannot be special summoned except by the effect of Contract with Exodia, which you saw up here. It can only be summoned if all 5 pieces of Exodia are in my graveyard. Now, one issue that Exodia decks have, and it's a big problem, is that because they rely on the pieces of Exodia, if 1 piece goes to the graveyard, that can often just completely end it for them. They can't win, because it's all about getting Exodia in their hand. Obviously, they have ways to bring it back, but generally speaking, it does completely screw with their plans. So Exodia Necros changes that disadvantage into an advantage, as it cannot be destroyed as a result of battle or by spell or trap cards, and during each of my standby phases it gains 500 attack points. Essentially, it's a monster that can't be destroyed and keeps getting stronger. The only way to destroy it is if any of the pieces are not in my graveyard. That is its one major weakness. And then the other one I have, and I have 2 copies of this, is Exodius, the Ultimate Forbidden Lord. Now, this is an interesting one, because what it can essentially do is I can use it if I wanted to. Say I had lost a couple of pieces, they've gone to the graveyard. I can use this monster to send all those pieces back to my deck and start again trying to draw Exodia. But on top of that, it has the additional effect that every time it attacks, it gains 1,000 attack points, okay? Basically, what you do is you send a normal type monster from your deck to the graveyard. Every time it attacks, it gains 1,000 attack points. If you send all 5 pieces of Exodia to the graveyard with this effect, you win. So it's like an anti-Exodia in a way. And this is why it's a very interesting card, and that's why I've got 2 of them, because it can bring Exodia back or it can replace him. And yeah, I mean that's my Exodia deck. So the main focus of today's duels is going to be getting Exodia. However, I am going to set a couple of secondary objectives, if you like, because one thing I would love to do is I would love to win with Necros, and I would love to win with Exodius. Absolutely love to. Often what will happen with Exodius, I've found at least, is that because he gains 1,000 attack points for every time he sends a piece to the graveyard, before you send the last piece, he'll have 4,000 attack points already, and often, if your opponent has let you get to that point, he is strong enough to win the duel anyway. That's often what I found. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Ah, nice refreshing water there. Yeah, very excited. Let's make a start, guys. Let's go.